Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dragon Dreams. I'm Ivan, and today I'm going to talk about magic users, wizards, and wizard skills. Okay, so in old school D&D, 1E on back, actually all of old school D&D, come to think of it, 2E on back, they didn't call them wizards, they called them magic users. And in most versions of the game prior to Wizards of the Coast buying TSR, magic users got one first level spell at first level and nothing else. There was no such thing as 0th level spells. They had cantrips, but cantrips meant something very different. Okay, cantrips meant these little tiny things like, think like Mickey Mouse in the Sorcerer's Apprentice with the brooms. It was stuff like that. It was like cleaning if you're an apprentice, it was like cleaning your wizard master's tower or something, with like cleaning spells, mending spells, little prank spells you could play on other students. It did not mean anything really very useful or powerful. And those didn't even come in until first edition. And as I've said on this channel before, Wizards of the Coast messed up the versioning. So first edition was not the first edition. It was the first edition of something called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which was something, that was a later edition of the earlier game. Okay, so you have magic users. So magic users and wizards are basically synonymous. Okay, and magic users could not wear any armor. They could only use a dagger in some of the early versions. There were some versions where they expanded the weapons use a little bit to maybe like staves, maybe slings. But it was really little. They could definitely not use crossbows like they can in 5e. And what that meant is that magic users were hard to play. It wasn't so much that they were low-powered. That's okay. They're an investment class. They should be low-powered at low levels. But at low levels, it was very difficult to contribute to the overall success of the party, particularly in some of the more basic versions of the game, like OD&D, Holmes Basic, BX, and BECMI. In 1E, they had familiars. So they had the Find Familiar spell that allows you to have a familiar that's basically theirs forever, pretty much. And that really helps you have a little, owl or whatever, fly around and do reconnaissance for you. But they also introduced non-weapon proficiencies midway in the development of 1E and some of the optional rules, and became standard in 2E. And later it got called skills. So magic users could do a little bit more eventually. But in some of the earlier versions of the game, apart from like throwing some daggers, the only thing they could really do was their one spell a day. And that's fine in terms of balance. But it's difficult in terms of contributing to the success of the party. And quite frankly, it was kind of boring playing magic users. Now, why am I bringing up old versions of the game like this? Because pretty much everything in the OSR, the old school Renaissance, is, harkening back to the old version of the game. That's what the old school stands for. And what's really popular, it turns out, is BX. For some reason, BX is just super popular. Actually, I think I know, because BX was a very well done game, a very well done version of D&D. And so for a lot of us playing something like Old School Essentials or Labyrinth Lord or Basic Fantasy or Blue Home, it can be challenging to play a magic user, not just in terms of power level, but in terms of contributing to the success of the party and in terms of being fun. I mean, there were times when you'd play a magic user in Old School when you didn't do anything. Like, there was long stretches of time when you just got called on and was like, I don't know, I don't do anything. I already cast my spell for the day. I have nothing to do. And so I have some thoughts on this video about how to make wizards or magic users or whatever we're calling them now a little more interesting to play at low levels without overpowering them. And the way that I approach it is trying to think of not so much spells or magic, sort of magic maybe in some cases, but just sort of what other things might a wizard be able to do even at first level. So the first three things that I have been experimenting with and playtesting in my games that I'm running is allowing first level wizards to use a read magic, detect magic, and analyze magic skills. So the idea is that they make some skill check. They have to make a skill check. And if they don't, it fails. If it's an object, like a magic item, or like a portal in the dungeon or something like that, they can use their detect magic on a per item or per object basis, not an area effect like the spell. If the spell is still there, if they want to cast it. And if they make their check, then they know whether or not it's magic. If they fail their check, then they cannot know whether or not it's magic using that skill until they go up a level. Now, if they want to cast a detect magic spell, that's a whole different story. And the same thing for read magic and analyze magic. So analyze magic would be a follow-up. If you know it's magic, you can find out what it is. If it's a magic item, you identify it. If it is something like a portal, let's say it's a portal to the elemental plane of fire, okay? You might see that there's fire glyphs and sigils, engraved on it. So I think maybe this has something to do with fire. And then with read magic, it would be on a per spell basis. Each spell in a scroll or a magic book, you have to make the check per each time. And if you fail, then you can't do it without the full read magic spell until you go up a level. Okay, so it all work in the same predictable way. And let me just stop there. I have some other neat ideas. But what I think is really neat about that is that there's this sense to where that would make read magic, detect magic, and analyze or identify be kind of more like part of the just basic repertoire of the wizard's skills. There's a sense to where they take out, various, ingredients and objects, and they have to sort of like set up a little lab maybe in the middle of the dungeon, and they're kind of looking at things and analyzing things and paging through books. I mean, maybe their spell book doesn't just contain spells. I mean, you can imagine a big tome with hundreds of pages. It might also have information on what different sigils mean and what different, there's all sorts of different things that might be analyzing. And by the way, each of these skills would take about 10 minutes to do. Get some water. So these skills would, there's not something you could just do like on the fly. You have to really kind of sit down and kind of take some time. And if you're in a dungeon, things could happen. Wandering monsters could come by while you're doing this. But the idea would be that the wizard is not just a spellcaster, but this magic expert. And it could be something low, like the skill rolls could be like, I've been experimenting with different things. Like my original idea was just an intelligence check, but that's a little bit easy. Like it's pretty common to do. You could do that. But my new thought is like roll your level or less on a d6, and at 6th level, it would be automatic. Okay? Which is a lot harder. It's a lot more like thief ability level. And there's a number of OSR games that are using exactly that system. Another idea I had was you could also have like I read that Dave Arneson, one of the makers of Dungeons and Dragons, was experimenting with the idea that when you're in town, magic users could lose constitution points to cast spells. And I thought, well, that's kind of neat. Well, what if you lost constitution points as you use these skills? Each successful use of a skill knocks a constitution point off. And yes, your hit points, current and maximum, would go down. And after a night's rest, you get them back. But it might be a little bit of a limiting factor in how often they could use it. So I have various ideas I've experimented with this. I've run this in 2 different games that I've run. I've brought this up on forums and gotten a pretty good sense of what people think and what works and what doesn't. And then to expand on that idea, of course, familiars are a really cool one to bring in. So, if you're using one of the earlier games like BX that does not have a find familiar spell, you could have in your skill system a way to have a familiar, which is really a neat thing to have. You can see through the eyes and, listen to the ears of your familiar is how it works. There's like a little animal. They're not like an imp usually or a quasit or something. They're usually just like a little animal. Think of like Harry Potter, like, owls and toads and snakes and stuff. And, or some other possibilities are just rating the skill systems or non-weapon proficiencies, as they were sometimes called, of various later versions of Dungeons and Dragons. There are a bunch of skills that are not really magical per se, but they're the sorts of things that wizards would probably know, like astronomy, okay, or alchemy, as in the non-magical stuff, like what actual medieval people here on Earth meant by alchemy. I don't mean making magic potions. I mean like sort of medieval level chemistry. Making cool stuff in the lab, maybe smoke bombs or oil slicks or, various different things like that. Maybe it's a cost associated with each one. Maybe it takes like a week to make each item. It's a lot of work. You have to have a lab. You have to have all these things. So there's a limitation for how much, you could make. There's a lot of ingredients involved. But end of the day, you could make neat, nifty little things. Or like herbalism. I think that there were medicinal herbalism, non-magical healing herbalism in some of the old skill systems. So you could do something like you could heal 1 to 3 hit points per character per day. So each character can only get this once a day with like a herbal poultice. And maybe like only once per wound, or maybe only like limited by a wound. So if there's a wound that's only 2 hit points, if you roll a 3, it still only heals 2 hit points. Now I know healing is sort of more of what we associate with clerics or paladins, but there's no reason why I think we could very easily imagine a wizard knowing something about herbs, right? So the idea here is to sort of just give them some skills that would be neat things. Or another thing is fortune telling. In various skill systems, like I remember distinctly in 2nd edition, for example, they had this notion that you could do fortune telling. And if you made your check, the DM would give you some true information about your question. And if not, they'd give you like false information or something, or maybe just, you don't know, it's fuzzy or something. And they'd make the roll, and you wouldn't know whether you got the truth or falsehood. So that would be kind of a cool thing too. Like they could read cards, like tarot cards, or throw the bones or whatever. I mean, that's the sort of thing that wizards do, and it would be like a really cool way for DMs to give clues about things. It wouldn't be like a deep level, knowledge about things. It wouldn't be like clairvoyance or anything like that. It wouldn't be like a crystal ball. It would just be like they could even give it in terms of that medium. Like if you're using tarot cards, you could say, death, or the fool or whatever, and, let the player interpret that. So I think that those would just be kind of neat ways that a low-level wizard could still contribute without casting spells. It wouldn't be all that powerful. Nothing I'm saying is powerful at all. In fact, it's rating a lot of proficiencies and skills that existed in later versions of the game that you could get anyway. Or here's another idea, is astronomy. So wizards, they know about the stars as part of their training, right? And so they could navigate anywhere in the wilderness as long as you have a clear sky, view of the sky. It's not overcast, you're not in a forest or whatever. You could navigate, or if you're on a ship or whatever, as long as you have a sextant and a star chart and stuff. You can know, looking at the North Star or whatever, making measurements and so forth, where you are. So there would be some you could do calendars with this. You could do the wizard, maybe your civilization relies on wizards to actually do the calendars. When are the solstices and equinoxes? When is the time to plant? When's the time to to harvest? These are the sorts of things that a lot of pre-modern societies really did. All right, I'm back. I had a glitch. So while I was talking about astronomy, I mean, a lot of pre-modern societies really kind of their magic people really were the ones who did the astronomy and did the calendars. It's not a coincidence that astrology was so closely associated with astronomy in pre-modern times. And of course, in the real world, it was the other way around. It was because they knew astronomy, that's what made them magic, quote unquote, right? But it's still, in a fantasy world, you could still very easily have that concept that it's the wizards who are the ones who make the calendars, right? And they're in high demand for that reason. So I think that would be, those skills would just be really cool to have, all these just neat little things they could do in the adventure. They would just make them useful all the time, not just when they have spells to cast, and would open up whole new dimensions to what they could do without making them really all that much more powerful. My players have really been enjoying this. They've really thought that it was a good way to do things, and that they really kind of opened up that class. And it kind of, in some sense, makes them more interesting, I think. Makes them a little bit more grounded in the setting. They're not just like a superpower class that just has these things, because most of the time, let's be honest, we don't really say what happens when you cast a sleep spell. We just say, okay, you cast a sleep spell, you affects a 30-foot diameter area that gets 10 of the orcs and doesn't hit 2 of them or whatever. And this kind of grounds wizards in being, really kind of cool. So I have written up some rules. I've put them on DriveThru RPG. They're called Wizard Skills by Ivan Richmond. I'm charging just $1. You can't beat that. It's a relatively good size. I mean, it's, so I don't remember how many pages, 9 or 10 pages, I think. Don't quote me on that, because I haven't looked at it in a while. And what I've done is I have little check bubbles, little empty circles next to each of the skills and each option within the skills. So like with alchemy, it lists the different things you could make with the alchemy skill. And that way, a DM can check off each and every item and then show that to their players and say, okay, I'm using this guy as supplement. This is what I'm using. This is what I'm not using. I also have some designer notes in there that I think really help people understand why I did what I did. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope it's food for thought. I'd be interested to hear what all of you think about this, how you think it should work, because I want to discuss this with people. I want to fine-tune this idea for a supplement, or maybe you'd have supplements of your own. I've put the link down to my supplement in the comments. And so if you'd like to buy it, please, go there. And as I said, what can you buy for $1 these days? It's just $1, and you have this thing. And I made it so that the preview on DriveThru gives you practically the whole thing when you preview it. So you want to know what you're getting before you buy it, all there. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please tell me what you think in the comments. If you've liked this video, please like it with a thumbs up. If you like this series, please consider subscribing. And if you know people who you think would benefit from this or be interested in it, or just fellow gamers, somebody who's playing a Magic user maybe, send them this video, pass it around. So, all right, well, that's all, folks. Good luck with your gaming out there, and particularly all you folks playing low-level wizards. And I will see you in the next video. All right. Happy gaming.